Sir, that seat is not for you. Step aside before I call security. The words did not arrive as a question. They arrived as a verdict. Diana Voss delivered them the way a judge delivers a sentence, with the absolute certainty of someone who had never once in 11 years of running first-class cabins been wrong about a passenger. Her smile was perfect. Her posture was perfect. Her expectation that the man in front of her would simply move was the most perfect thing of all. He did not move. Marcus Holloway stood in the narrow aisle of Crestline Air Flight 304 bound from Chicago O'Hare to Atlanta and looked at the woman blocking his path the way a man looks at weather he has already decided to walk through. He was wearing a faded gray hoodie, dark jeans, and a pair of white sneakers with a small scuff on the left toe. A worn black duffel bag hung from his left hand. The bag had the particular texture of something that had been dragged across real surfaces: concrete floors, aircraft ramps, the backs of military trucks in the dark. It had never seen the inside of a boutique hotel. It had seen considerably more interesting things than that. There was nothing about Marcus Holloway at a glance that suggested the kind of man who sat in first class. That was the whole point of Diana's certainty, and it was the whole source of her mistake. She stood at the entrance to the first-class cabin with one hand resting lightly on the seat back of row 2, and the other holding her crew tablet at a precise angle, not reading it, just holding it the way people hold objects when they want to communicate that they have access to information you do not. She was tall, and her blonde hair was swept into a low French twist that managed to look effortless and deliberate at the same time. Her uniform was tailored close, the kind of fit that turned heads without crossing any line that could be documented. Her small gold stud earrings caught the cabin light. Her posture said she had never doubted herself in a professional context and had no current plans to begin. Seat 1. A, Marcus said. His voice was calm, low, the kind of voice that does not request permission from the room. Diana's smile did not waver, but something behind her eyes shifted a brief recalibration, the kind a person makes when reality presents an unexpected variable. She glanced at her tablet. Her finger traced down the screen with a slowness that communicated thoroughness, though what it actually communicated to anyone watching carefully was performance. "I don't see a confirmed reservation for that seat under your name," she said. "There may have been a booking error. Economy is still boarding. I'd be happy to have someone assist you to your correct section." "My name is Marcus Holloway," he said. "The reservation is confirmed." Diana tilted her head with practiced warmth. "Do you have your boarding pass?" Marcus raised his phone. The screen was clear, unambiguous, glowing in the recycled air of the jet bridge Crestline Air Flight 304. Seat 1, A. First class. Full fare. Marcus A. Holloway. She looked at it for exactly the length of time it takes a person to decide they are not going to accept something. Then she looked back at him. "I'll need to verify this with our gate system," she said smoothly. "Could you step to the side while I sort this out?" "It won't take long." "I am sorted out," Marcus said. "His ticket is valid. His seat is available. He would like to sit down." From seat 2, C, a man in a charcoal suit looked up from his newspaper. Brad Kellner, 44, was a senior partner at a private equity firm, a man who had been flying first class for long enough that the act of boarding had become a matter of personal choreography. Early, efficient, settled before the chaos of economy arrived. He had a particular look he gave to things that inconvenienced him. Not quite hostility, more like disdain at an inconvenient frequency, the expression of a man who had spent 20 years in rooms where his displeasure moved outcomes. He gave that look to Marcus now briefly and then looked at Diana. "Is there a problem?" he said. His voice was calibrated for the situation, not quite rude, not quite concerned, landing somewhere in the territory of impatient authority. "Just a verification issue. Diana replied, her smile directed at Brad with the slight uptick of warmth she reserved for passengers she had already decided mattered. "We'll have it sorted in a moment." "Take your time," Brad said, turning back to his paper, "though we are on a schedule. Before we go any further into what happened on Flight 304, I want to stop right here and ask you something directly. Have you ever walked into a space where someone looked at you and decided you didn't belong before you'd said a single word? Have you ever had to prove something to someone who had already made up their mind? Drop your city in the comments right now and tell me where you're watching from. Because this story is going to take you somewhere. And if you believe that every person deserves to be treated with basic dignity regardless of what they're wearing or what they look like, hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. What happens on this plane in the next few minutes, nobody in that cabin is going to forget. Now let's go back to Gate C-22 and watch it all unfold. Marcus Holloway had arrived at O'Hare 2 hours early. That was habit. 30 years of military discipline had built a life around margins, time margins, safety margins, the kind of margins that kept aircraft in the air and people alive. He had checked in at the Crestline priority desk, moved through security without incident, and spent an hour in the private lounge reading a briefing on secondary runway development at 3 regional airports his firm had recently acquired partial operating rights in. When boarding was called, he had walked to the gate at his usual pace, not hurried, not dawdling, and boarded with Group 1, which was where his ticket placed him. He had not expected this. He rarely did. And it still surprised him just slightly every time. Not the existence of it that had stopped being surprising decades ago. What surprised him consistently was the confidence. The way certainty arrived before any evidence had been gathered. The way Diana Voss had looked at him and reached a conclusion that her entire subsequent behavior was now organized around defending. He was familiar with the architecture of that kind of moment. He had seen it built in real time more times than he cared to count. And every time he had made the same choice he was making now to stand exactly where he was, to remain exactly who he was, and to let the record speak when the record was ready. The record was always ready eventually. Diana's tablet pinged. She looked at the screen, frowned a brief involuntary narrowing of her brows that lasted less than a second before it was smoothed away, and set the tablet face down on the drink cart beside her, with a small definitive click. The click of someone who had received information she did not intend to incorporate. "Sir," she said, and the courtesy title arrived at the exact angle of something that was not courteous. "I'm going to ask you one more time to step to the side. We have verified passengers who need to board. Your situation will be resolved, but I cannot hold up the line indefinitely." "I am the line," Marcus said simply. "The line is held up by you standing in front of my seat." From behind him, in the jet bridge, a small sound, a woman's voice, low almost to herself. "Something is happening. I don't know what it is yet." Rosa Delgado, 29, had been holding her phone toward the window framing the wing for a travel reel she had been planning since takeoff was announced. But the scene in the aisle had pulled her camera slowly, quietly in a new direction. Rosa had 820,000 followers and a professional habit of filming things that deserved to be seen. The scene in front of her deserved to be seen. From row 3B, a man named Finn Gallagher, 33, a software engineer from Seattle, had lowered his laptop screen. He watched with the focused, unhurried attention of someone who was composing what he observed even as it happened, cataloging it, measuring it, deciding what it meant. Diana pressed the intercom button with the particular crispness of someone escalating through channels. "Camilla, can you come to the forward galley, please?" A moment later, Camilla Reyes, 26, a junior flight attendant with wide dark eyes and a face that hid nothing. It was feeling appeared at the curtain separating first class from the forward galley. She looked at Marcus. She looked at Diana. She looked at the space between them that contained everything that had happened so far and several things that were about to happen. "We have a seating discrepancy," Diana said, her tone smooth as a briefing. Will you pull the updated manifest? Camilla moved to her own tablet and brought up the passenger list. Her eyes moved down the screen quickly with the efficiency of someone who had been doing this long enough for the layout to be automatic. She reached row 1. She paused. 1A is listed as occupied, she said. Her voice was careful. Holloway Marcus, full fare first class. Diana did not look at her. She kept her eyes on Marcus. There must be a duplicate entry, she said with the pleasant briskness of someone closing a door. These things happen more than passengers realize. She turned back to her tablet. We'll sort it out. In the meantime, I'm going to sit down, Marcus said. He said it the same way he had said everything else, without raising his pitch, without any shift in the quality of his calm. With the simple, complete finality of a man who has decided the conversation is over, because the conversation has covered all available ground. He took one step forward. Diana stepped sideways. She blocked the path to 1A with the smooth precision of someone who had made this move before, not dramatically, not with any gesture that could be characterized as aggressive, just the simple repositioning of a body in a space claiming the aisle with her presence, the way people claim things without technically touching them. The cabin went still. The thing about Diana Voss was that she had spent 11 years building a version of herself that was never wrong in a cabin. It wasn't arrogance, exactly. It was something more structural than that, a way of operating that had calcified over time into certainty the way wood turns to stone when conditions hold long enough. She had run cabins on transatlantic routes and domestic hops and charter flights for groups who believed the aircraft existed for their personal convenience. She had managed medical emergencies and irate passengers in the particular chaos of a full first-class section during a 3-hour delay. She had done all of it with the conviction that her read of any situation was the correct one. That conviction had never been expensive before. She stood in the path between Marcus Holloway and seat 1A and looked at him with the patient authority of someone waiting for physics to assert itself. "Sir," she said, and the warmth in her voice was a tool now rather than a gesture. "I understand this is frustrating, and I genuinely want to resolve it as quickly as possible. But our system is indicating a conflict with this seat assignment. Until we clear that directly with the ground supervisor, I am not in a position to allow you to occupy a first-class seat." She paused, tilting her head fractionally. "It's not personal. It's a matter of procedure. I'm sure you understand." Marcus studied her face. Not the expression, he was past the expression, the bones of it, the architecture of what was underneath. He had sat across tables from generals who used the word procedure the way Diana was using it now, as a wall, rather than a rule, as a barrier rather than a standard. "Call your supervisor," he said. "Do it now. I'll wait here." Diana reached for her headset. In 2C, Brad Kellner had lowered his newspaper entirely. He had the alert posture of a man who smells advantage in a situation, though he was not yet certain what the advantage was or how to use it. He set the paper down with the corners aligned to habit, the habit of a man who controlled the surfaces around him, and looked at Marcus with the expression he gave to things that were wasting his time. You know, Brad said not to Marcus precisely, but in his direction they have these processes for a reason. If the system flagged something, there's usually something behind it. He spoke with the pleasant reasonableness of someone who has decided their opinion is the same as objective reality. He delivered the sentence like advice. It was not advice. Marcus did not look at him. "I've found it helps to just take a different seat in these situations," Brad continued, nodding back toward the rear of first class. "Save everyone the 20 minutes. He said it with the mild magnanimity of someone offering a solution they expected to be received gratefully. Marcus turned to him then, not quickly, not with any visible change in temperature, just the slow, complete rotation of his attention the way a lighthouse turns, taking in what it finds. "I paid for seat 1A, Marcus said. "That is where I am going to sit." Brad made a small sound, not quite dismissal, not quite disbelief, and picked up his paper. "Whatever you say," he murmured, which was the version of fine said by someone who was not fine and intended for everyone to know it. Diana had her headset in place and was speaking at a low frequency. Her back turned by a calculated 45 degrees, enough to suggest privacy, not enough to actually create it. The cabin was quiet enough that her words specifically chosen arrived anyway. "Ground Ops, this is Flight 304, Crestline Gate, C22. We have a seating dispute. First-class passenger claiming 1A. Manifest shows a potential conflict. I need verification on the booking before we can proceed." Rosa Delgado had stopped moving. Her phone was level with her eye line, the angle catching Diana's profile and Marcus's stillness in the same frame. Her live count had climbed past 400 without her saying anything to push it. She said nothing now. She just held the frame. Finn Gallagher had opened a note on his phone. He typed without looking at the keys. "Flight 304, O'Hare to Atlanta. First class. Black male passenger. Full fare. Seat 1A, being denied boarding. Crew declining to accept their own manifest." His thumb moved steadily. His face stayed neutral. The neutrality cost him something. In the galley, Camilla Reyes stood with the manifest tablet pressed against her chest, reading the same entry she had read twice already. Holloway Marcus, 1A, full fare first class, executive priority tag. She knew what the executive priority tag meant. She had seen it 3 times in 5 years, always attached to accounts that connected to corporate stakes, board-level access company flag bookings. The entry was unambiguous. There was no conflict. There was no duplicate. There was a man with a valid ticket standing in the aisle being told the ticket didn't mean what it said. She had seen the shape of this before. Not exactly this, but the texture of it. The particular way a situation arranged itself when someone with authority had decided on an outcome before checking the evidence. She took a step toward the aisle curtain, then stopped. Diana finished her call and turned back. Something had stiffened in her posture, a fraction of an inch in the spine and additional precision in the set of her shoulders. Whatever the ground supervisor had told her had not resolved the situation in the direction she preferred, but she was not going to let that arrive on her face. "Our ground supervisor is cross-referencing directly with the ticketing system," she said, with the smoothness of someone who has decided that delay is the same as progress. "It should be no more than a few minutes. In the meantime, we are asking that you take a temporary seat in our premium economy section while this is resolved." She gestured toward the rear curtain. "You'll be very comfortable, and the moment we have confirmation—" "No," Marcus said. The word was not loud. It was not sharp. It was simply complete. The period at the end of a sentence that Diana had not finished writing. The refusal of a man who had said what he needed to say and meant every syllable of it. Diana's jaw held its angle, but the smile cost more now. It was no longer automatic. She was manufacturing it second by second, and the manufacturing showed. "Sir," she said, "I need to inform you that refusal to comply with crew instructions during the boarding process is a violation of federal aviation regulations." She spoke clearly, with the particular volume of someone performing for an audience rather than addressing an individual. She was not in this moment speaking to Marcus. She was speaking to the record she was building. "I would hate for this to escalate beyond what it needs to be." She let the word escalate hang for a moment. "It would be so much simpler." "What would be simpler," Marcus said, "is if you looked at the manifest your colleague pulled 5 minutes ago and acknowledged what is written clearly on it." He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The cabin was quiet enough that every word he said landed exactly where he placed it. Diana's eyes cut briefly to Camilla, who was still standing at the edge of the galley curtain with the tablet in her hands, and the expression of someone who is holding something they have not decided whether to use. "The entry is clear," Camilla said. Her voice came out quieter than she intended. She steadied it. 1A, full fare. His name. Diana looked at her for exactly 2 seconds. Those 2 seconds contained a complete communication that was delivered without words and received without ambiguity. It said, "You are a junior member of this crew, and what you just said will have consequences for you, and you should consider whether you want those consequences, and the time to consider it is right now." Camilla held the tablet. She did not speak again. Diana turned back to Marcus. She crossed her arms not aggressively, but with the air of someone closing a file. "The ground supervisor is still cross-referencing. I need you to step back and allow the remaining passengers to board." Her voice had dropped a further half-degree colder now beneath the professional polish, the way you feel ice beneath a surface that looks like everything else. "We are holding up an entire flight." "I am not holding up the flight," Marcus said. "You are holding up the flight by standing in front of my seat." From 3. B. Finn Gallagher's typing had stopped. He was watching with the complete attention of someone who cannot stop what is happening but has decided the only decent thing available to him is to refuse to look away. He had opened a direct message to a contact at the Tribune. "Flight 304. Right now. Gate C, 2-2. First class. Black passenger. Full fare. Seat 1A. Being denied boarding. Crew refusing to accept their own manifest. I'm in 3B. Everything is documented." He sent it before the doubt could arrive. Rosa's live count crossed 800. The comments were arriving faster than she could read them, but she didn't read them. She held the frame. Brad Kellner had not returned to his paper. He was watching the exchange with the alert attention of someone who is not yet sure which direction is advantageous but wants to be positioned to move when it becomes clear. He watched Diana. He watched Marcus. He watched the gap between them that was not closing. "He doesn't look like he belongs in first class," Brad said. He did not say it to anyone in particular. He said it at the moderate volume of a man making an observation he considers self-evident and expects to land without friction. He said it the way people say things they have said many times before in many rooms and have never once been asked to examine. The cabin went very still. Not with shock, exactly. With recognition. The kind that settles over a room when someone says out loud what was floating in the air and every person present has to decide right now in real time which side of it they are on. Finn Gallagher looked up from his phone. Rosa Delgado's camera angle shifted slowly, deliberately to Brad's face. The woman in 2A pressed herself slightly back into her seat. Marcus did not look at Brad. He reached down, lifted his duffel bag from the floor, and placed it carefully in the overhead bin above seat 1A. He did it slowly, methodically, with the particular care of someone who has loaded equipment in conditions that made this look trivial. He closed the bin. He stood back. The act was so ordinary, so completely the act of a person settling in, that it created a sudden gap in Diana's certainty. For one moment, reality pushed back against her narrative. "Sir." He sat down. The cabin exhaled. Diana looked at the man in seat 1. A seated buckled his duffel overhead, his hands resting on his thighs, his face turned slightly toward the window with the calm of someone who has decided he is home, and she reached for the intercom button. She pressed it. Her voice was clear and carrying and calibrated for maximum official weight. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the delay. We are experiencing a seating discrepancy in first class that requires security assistance to resolve. We appreciate your patience." She looked at Marcus when she said security. He looked out the window. From the galley, Camilla heard the announcement and closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. Then she opened them. She set the tablet on the counter. She looked at Marcus through the gap in the curtain, the man in the seat perfectly still looking at a runway, and she felt something that was equal parts shame and resolve fighting each other in her chest. She picked the tablet back up. Marcus Holloway had been 19 years old the first time a room decided he was in the wrong place. It was not an airplane. It was a cafeteria at Lackland Air Force Base in San Antonio during the third week of basic training on a morning that smelled of industrial soap and jet fuel, and the particular anxiety of 200 young people learning to become something new. He had come in early before the crowd still clean from the first pre-dawn shower, his uniform pressed as precisely as he could manage, and sat at a table near the window where the light was clear and good for reading. He had opened a study guide for the Air Force Officer Qualifying Test, the AFOQT, which he had been preparing for since he was 15, working from library copies of the study material because he could not afford his own. A senior airman had stopped beside his table. The airman had looked at him with the patient certainty of someone identifying an error that is too obvious to require explanation. "You're in the enlisted section," the airman had said. "NCO lounge is that way." He had pointed toward a different room. There was no sign. There was no marked boundary. There was only the airman's assumption, the complete unexamined confidence of a man who had looked at Marcus and known without a single piece of evidence that he was in the wrong place. Marcus had looked at the table. He had looked at the window light. He had looked at the airman. "I know," he had said. And he had returned to his book. The airman had stood there for a moment. Then he had walked away. Marcus had passed the AFOQT in the 97th percentile. He had been commissioned 2 years later. He had flown F-16S for 8 years before taking his first command. He had run 3 deployments across 2 theaters and accumulated a service record that required multiple pages to summarize. And every time in every room where someone had pointed toward a different door, every terminal where someone had questioned his ticket, every conference room where someone had looked at his clothes and reached a conclusion before he had spoken, he had made the same choice he had made at that cafeteria table. He stayed. He was right. And he let the record speak when it was ready. The record was always ready eventually. He was thinking about that cafeteria as the sound of boots on the jet bridge announced the arrival of an airport security officer. Officer Darren Howell, 35, stepped into the aircraft with the careful posture of someone trained to assess a situation before committing to it. He was not on first impression a man who had decided anything yet. He looked at Diana first, then at Marcus seated in 1A with his hands on his thighs, and the expression of a man waiting for a flight to depart. Then at the space between them which contained everything that had happened and was still ongoing. "We have a seating dispute," Diana said immediately, moving toward him with the smooth efficiency of someone who had been waiting for this particular resource to arrive. "Passenger in 1A is refusing crew instructions. He has occupied the seat without verification and will not comply with requests to temporarily relocate." Howell looked at Marcus. "Sir, are you refusing to comply with crew instructions?" "I am refusing to leave a seat I paid for," Marcus said. He said it without heat, without edge, with the quality of someone stating a measurement. Howell's eyes moved to the phone in Marcus's hand where the boarding pass was still displayed. He looked at the screen. He looked at the seat number. He looked at Marcus. There was a pause in which the geometry of the situation seemed to be working out something complicated. He turned to Diana. "What's the specific conflict in the system we're cross-referencing with ground now?" Diana said. She kept her voice precise and professional. "It should be resolved within minutes." Howell nodded once slowly. He took a half step to the side, not arresting, not removing, just positioning himself in the way neutral parties position themselves when they haven't yet decided what neutral means. The way a referee moves into a contested space without yet calling the play. Rosa's live count had reached 4,200. She had not spoken in 7 minutes. She held the frame. Finn Gallagher had a reply from the Tribune. "Watching. Send me everything." He typed back. "Recording now. 3B." Brad Kellner was looking at his hands. He had not picked up his paper since the words he'd spoken had arrived in the cabin and settled there in the particular way words settle when they cannot be taken back. He was not, to his credit, a man who was unaware of what he had said. He was simply a man who had, until very recently, lived in an environment where saying it cost him nothing. That environment had just shifted. "Something is happening out there," Rosa murmured to her phone very quietly. Not an announcement, just an observation. "The camera holds the frame. You can see everything from here." Diana stepped closer to Howell. She dropped her voice, but the cabin's quiet was absolute in a way the aircraft systems could not fully absorb. "We need to proceed with removal," she said. "He is non-compliant. He occupied the seat without authorization and he refused to." "He sat down," Howell said flatly, "after you blocked him from sitting down." He looked at her with the particular patience of someone who has been placed in situations like this before and carries the history of them. "I cannot remove a person from a seat that matches their boarding pass. That is not something I'm in a position to do." "He's been verbally disruptive," Diana said. "He has spoken calmly and correctly at every point I've observed," Howell said. Diana's jaw held. She looked at Marcus in seat 1A. Marcus was looking out the window with the focused calm of someone who has decided that the runway outside is more interesting than the interior of the cabin, though everyone in the cabin knew this was not true. "Now, before I tell you what happened next, I need to hear from you. Have you ever stayed calm when everything around you wanted you to react? Have you ever held your ground, not with anger, but with stillness, knowing the truth was going to speak eventually? Leave your answer in the comments below. Because what Marcus Holloway is about to face next is the moment this whole situation reaches its peak, and what he does with it, and what one person finally decides to do is going to change everything. If you haven't subscribed yet, do it now, because this is the story that stays with you. Let's keep going." Diana had one more move. She had been building toward it since the moment Howell declined to remove Marcus on her request. She recognized on some level she was not examining directly that the situation had moved past the point where procedure alone would carry it. What she needed now was volume. Not loudness. Diana Voss did not raise her voice. What she needed was the formal documented weight of an elevated declaration, something that created a record that forced the next step. She pressed the crew intercom. Her voice was clear, level, carrying in the way of someone who has been trained to be heard over engine noise and passenger confusion. "Ground operations. This is Crestline 304 lead crew. I am initiating a formal Level 1 cabin disturbance declaration forward, first class seat 1A. Passenger is non-compliant with crew instructions. Requesting secondary security and supervisor response. Please log timestamp." The words Level 1 landed in the cabin like stones dropped into still water. The ripple was immediate and visible. The woman in 2A pressed further back into her seat. A man near the rear of first class whispered something to the person next to him. 3 phones came up in the rows behind first class, where economy passengers craning to see through the gap in the curtain had been piecing together the scene from fragments. Rosa's live count jumped past 8,000 in 40 seconds. Marcus heard the Level 1 declaration and felt something tighten in his chest. Not fear. He had been afraid in conditions that made this situation look like a waiting room. Not anger either. Anger had been an option he'd set aside around the same time he sat down in the seat. What he felt was the particular compression of a man who has been patient and correct and composed at every step, and is watching the mechanism reach for its worst available option anyway. Not because the worst option is justified, but because the mechanism is committed now, and commitment in the absence of honesty has its own gravity. He did not let it arrive on his face. He looked at the runway. A second security officer appeared at the jet bridge entrance, younger than Howell, broader, with the alert posture of someone who had come from a radio call and was still reading the room. He looked at the scene. He looked at the man in the seat. He looked at Howell, who gave him a look that communicated more than speech. Diana turned to the second officer before Howell could say anything. She moved quickly, efficiently, the way someone moves when they believe momentum is an argument. The passenger in 1A has refused multiple crew instructions and has occupied a seat under dispute, she said. We need to initiate a formal escort. With the captain's confirmation, we can proceed immediately. The second officer looked at Marcus. Marcus was reading the in-flight safety card with the focused expression of a man who has decided to be thoroughly informed about emergency procedures. Has he been physically disruptive? The officer asked. He has been verbally non-compliant, Diana said. The officer looked at Howell again. Howell's expression was not helping Diana's case. Then Brad Kellner made a decision he had been edging toward for 3 minutes, driven by the particular impatience of a man who has decided the correct outcome and cannot understand why the mechanism is taking so long to deliver it. He leaned forward. "I'll tell you what the issue is," Brad said, his voice carrying the crisp authority of someone accustomed to being listened to. "He doesn't look like a first-class passenger." He gestured at Marcus with the small, precise motion of a man pointing at a problem he expects someone else to solve. "I don't know how else to say it. That's what this is about." The cabin went airless, not with shock, with the particular quality of silence that arrives when something that has been unsaid becomes said, and every person in the room has to decide in the next 3 seconds what they are going to do with that. Finn Gallagher's hands stopped moving. Rose's camera angle shifted slow, deliberate, unmistakable to Brad's face. The live count hit 12,000. The woman in 2A closed her eyes. Officer Howell turned to Brad. He did not rush the turn. "Sir," he said. His voice was level and precise and completely empty of deference. "I need you to keep your commentary out of this conversation." Brad blinked. "I beg your—" Sir Howell repeated, and the second instance landed harder than the first. "Stay out of it." Brad leaned back with the compressed expression of someone filing a grievance internally for later use, but the room had heard what he'd said. The room was going to keep hearing it for a long time. Diana had heard it too. For one brief second, something moved across her face. Not discomfort, not regret. Something more complicated, the involuntary recognition of a mirror. Then she set it aside. She turned to the second security officer. "We need to proceed," she said. "Captain's confirmation will come through momentarily. I'm calling it in now." She lifted the cockpit intercom. And Marcus Holloway in seat 1A, with his boarding pass on his phone and his duffel in the overhead bin and his back straight against the leather seat, turned his face away from the runway and looked at nothing in particular, and thought about a cafeteria in San Antonio 27 years ago, where the light had been good for reading and the truth had been patient enough to wait. He pressed the call button on his armrest. Not for a flight attendant, not for a drink. He pressed it slowly, deliberately, and then looked at Diana with the expression of a man who has made a decision about something. "You should call the captain," he said. "I'd like him to know I'm here." Diana stared at him. He looked out the window. "Please do," he added, and his voice was completely, entirely, infuriatingly calm. Diana Voss did not like being told to call the captain because it meant transferring authority she believed she was exercising correctly. She was the lead crew on this flight. She ran cabins. She made the assessments. She had initiated the level 1 she had called security. She had proceeded at every step with the documented precision of someone who knew how to build a case within the architecture of airline procedure. Handing the situation to the captain meant acknowledging on some level that the situation had grown beyond her and that acknowledgement was not available to her. But Marcus had asked for it. And Marcus asking for it with that particular quality of calm had changed the room in a way Diana could not quite account for. She pressed the cockpit intercom anyway because not pressing it now would have looked worse than pressing it. "Captain, this is Diana. We have a forward first-class situation that may require your presence on the floor." A pause, then a measured voice, alert and unhurried. Nature of the situation. Passenger dispute. Seat 1A. Security is present. Non-compliance has been documented. I have initiated Level 1 protocol. A longer pause this time. Longer than it should have been. Longer than Diana was comfortable with. Copy that, the voice said. Stand by. Diana turned back to the cabin. She looked at Marcus. Marcus was looking at her with the patient attention of someone who has all the time in the world and is not concerned about how it's spent. In 2C, Brad Kellner had gone very quiet. The sentence he had spoken, "He doesn't look like a first-class passenger," had not been absorbed by the cabin the way he'd expected. It had not produced agreement or relief or the small collective exhale of people who had been thinking the same thing and were glad someone had finally said it. Instead, it had produced something he had not prepared for. It had produced stillness. The heavy, accountable stillness of a room that had heard something it could not unhear. Brad looked at his paper. He did not pick it up. Rosa Delgado's live count had crossed 17,000. The comments were scrolling faster than language. Someone had already clipped the 30-second segment where Brad said what he said and was posting it separately on 3 platforms. The clip was spreading with the particular speed of things that are simultaneously ordinary and shocking ordinary, because this shape of thing had happened before many times in many places, and shocking because this time it was on camera in real time with a frame that caught every face. Finn Gallagher had been texting the Tribune journalist continuously for 8 minutes. He typed with the focused efficiency of someone performing the only useful act available to him. Level 1 declared, "Second security officer on board. Crew has formally requested removal. Booking is valid, everything on record." The second security officer was standing near the front of first class, his radio in his hand, his face working through something. He had come in on a Level 1 call. He had expected to find a disruptive passenger. Instead, he had found a man sitting in a seat holding a valid boarding pass, not moving, not speaking, not doing anything that the officer had any protocol for addressing. Everything he had been trained to respond to was absent. Everything he was being asked to do anyway was present. He looked at Howell. Howell looked at the overhead bin where Marcus's bag was stored at the boarding pass, still visible on Marcus's phone at the seat that Marcus occupied with the uncomplicated solidity of a man who was exactly where he was supposed to be. Howell looked at Diana. He looked at the second officer. Then he said quietly, "For the second officer alone, I can't sign off on this." The second officer processed that for 3 seconds. Then he nodded once the smallest possible amount. Diana caught none of this. She was managing the intercom, managing the 2 officers, managing the passengers, managing the record. She was building too many things at once for the smallest signals to land. She turned to the second officer with the full weight of her authority. "We need to proceed," she said. "The Level 1 is documented. The captain will confirm. We have grounds to initiate escort." "On what grounds specifically?" Howell asked. He was not being confrontational. His voice was the voice of someone asking for a document and expecting to receive one. Diana looked at him. "Non-compliance with crew instruction." He sat down in his assigned seat, Howell said, "with a valid boarding pass, which your colleague confirmed from the manifest 15 minutes ago." Diana's composure was still intact, but it was working now visibly the way a structure works when weight is applied to parts that weren't designed to bear it. The smooth certainty that had carried her through the last 20 minutes was showing its first signs of genuine strain. "He refused to step aside during boarding," she said. "Because you stepped in front of his seat," Howell said. He did not say it harshly. He said it with the particular weariness of someone who has been repeating the same fact for 20 minutes and is not sure how many more times the repetition needs to occur. From seat 3B. Finn said, "I have a record of every exchange since boarding began." He said it calmly to no one in particular. His phone was face up on his tray table. Every word. time-stamped. Diana looked at him. "Sir, this is a crew matter." "I'm a witness," Finn said. "That's a passenger matter." A murmur moved through the visible rows of first class. Not loud, not coordinated. The sound of people deciding things privately and letting the decision arrive as a sound rather than a statement. Rosa, still silent, had adjusted her angle again. She was now capturing the full forward section of first-class Marcus in one, a Diana in the aisle, the two security officers at the front. Brad staring at the tray table, Finn with his phone up. The geometry of the scene, the shape of what was happening. Diana made a decision. She had been moving toward it for several minutes without acknowledging it to herself, the way you move toward the edge of something by taking smaller and smaller steps until the edge is the only thing in front of you. She lifted the second intercom line. Not the cockpit line, the one that connected to the ground operations manager. "This is Crestline 304 lead crew," she said. "We are requesting authorization to proceed with formal passenger escort seat 1 of first class. Grounds level 1 declaration documented non-compliance booking dispute under active cross-reference." She paused. "We are ready to proceed on confirmation." A silence on the line. Then 304, "Can you confirm security is on board?" "Affirmative." "And the booking dispute has the cross-reference come back?" "It is still pending." Another silence. Longer. The kind of silence that ground operations creates when it is deciding how exposed it wants to be. "Stand by 304. Diana stood by. The cabin stood by with her. The boarding music that had been playing through the overhead speakers had stopped several minutes ago, and the aircraft was full of the particular silence of a pressurized space in which everyone is pretending to be doing something other than listening. Marcus Holloway sat in seat 1A and breathed. He breathed the way he had been taught to breathe in the aircraft, evenly from the diaphragm, the breath that keeps your hands steady when your instruments are arguing and your altitude is wrong, and the choice you have to make has to be made right now, not in 30 seconds now. He had breathed this way in conditions that made this situation look trivial. He breathed it now because it was the right breath for this moment, and because every other choice available to him was worse. He thought about what was happening. He thought about it clearly, without anger, without the distortion that anger would have introduced. A woman who had looked at him and decided he was not what she expected had built step by step, action by action, a case against him from the materials of her own assumption. She had called procedure and protocol and level 1 and security not because any evidence had appeared to justify them, but because the absence of evidence was something she could not process. She had reached for the worst available tool, not because she had determined it was necessary, but because she had run out of other tools that would produce the outcome she had already decided on. He understood this. He did not excuse it. He understood it. And he understood that what was about to arrive through the cockpit door would change the entire shape of the room. The ground operations line clicked back on. 304. This is Ops. We have a flag on that booking. Executive priority, tag board level account. We need to hold on the escort until we have confirmation from above my level. Do not proceed. I repeat, do not proceed. Diana's hand holding the intercom receiver did not move for 2 full seconds. The second security officer heard it. He looked at Howell. Howell nodded. In the galley, Camilla Reyes heard it through the thin wall separating the galley from the forward cabin. She looked at the manifest tablet in her hands. Executive priority tag. She had known that for 23 minutes. She had said so once and been told to stand down. She was not going to stand down again. She stepped out through the curtain. She walked to the center of the aisle directly behind Diana and held up the tablet. "Captain should see this before anything else happens," she said. Her voice did not shake. She had decided somewhere between the first time she'd read the entry and now that the thing being said about her stepping back needed to stop being true. "I've had the entry for 23 minutes. It's unambiguous." Diana turned to look at her. Something moved in Diana's face that was not quite what it had been, before something less certain. Something that was making contact reluctantly with the possibility that the situation was not what she had said. It was. She opened her mouth. The cockpit door handle moved. The sound was quiet, a hydraulic shift, a change in pressure barely audible over the ventilation system. But in a cabin that silent, it arrived like the first note of something everyone had been waiting to hear. And Captain Paul Merritt stepped out. He was 55, with white at his temples and a face that weather and altitude and responsibility had shaped into something that carried gravity even at rest. 4 stripes. Immaculate. Eyes that moved fast and prioritized quickly the eyes of someone who had spent 3 decades reading cockpits and situations with the same compressed efficiency. He did not look at Diana first. He looked at Seat 1A, and the world, for Captain Paul Merritt, briefly stopped. The thing that arrived in Paul Merritt's chest was not gradual. It was the way recognition sometimes works, complete before the mind has finished processing it, the body knowing something whole, seconds before the voice is ready to confirm it. He looked at the man in Seat 1A, older now gray at the temples where the hoodie's fabric left the hairline visible, broader in the shoulders than memory, held him wearing the same quality of stillness that Merritt had spent 12 years trying to locate in his memory and file correctly, and something that had been displaced for a very long time settled back into place. He walked forward, past Diana, who had begun to speak, past Officer Howell, who stepped aside without being asked, past Brad Kellner, who tracked the captain's movement with the alert attention of someone who has finally noticed the room is larger than they thought, past the faces of every first-class passenger, most of whom had stopped pretending to do anything other than watch. He stopped beside Seat 1A. The story that came back to Paul Merritt was not soft, and it was not slow. He had been 27 years old, a first lieutenant on his 3rd deployment, running close air support missions in a mountain corridor that the briefings called manageable. His aircraft had taken a hit from a ground-based system that his instruments hadn't seen. The left engine died, then the right. He had 17 seconds of controlled flight remaining and a co-pilot named Rodriguez, who was unconscious before the second engine failed. The emergency channel had gone out. No one from his squadron answered. A voice had answered. Calm as a heartbeat, precise as a calculation, with no trace of alarm in any syllable, a voice that walked him through a dead-stick landing procedure on a dirt road outside a village that existed on no map he'd been issued. The voice stayed on the channel the whole time. It did not express concern. It expressed competence, and competence was the only thing that was going to keep them alive. He had made the landing. He had not made it cleanly. The aircraft had come apart along the right side, and the fuel had started moving toward heat. And Rodriguez was still in the cockpit, and Paul Merritt had not been able to get the door open from inside. Through the cracked windscreen, through the smoke, and the sound of something bending that was not meant to bend, he had seen a figure come through the dust. Not running the panicked run of someone responding to chaos. Moving with the controlled urgency of someone who has made peace with the risk and is operating regardless. The figure had reached his door before the fuel had reached anything irreversible. He had woken up in a field hospital with Rodriguez in the bed beside him, both of them alive. The man who had heard the emergency channel and diverted from his own mission objective to land on a dirt road outside a village he had no reason to be near was named Major Marcus Holloway, later Lieutenant Colonel, later Colonel, later a retired man who built a private investment firm that held stakes in 17 companies, 4 of which were aviation-related, one of which was Crestline Air's parent holding group. Later, a man in a gray hoodie in Seat 1A. Paul Merritt looked at the scar above the left eyebrow, thin, precise, partially hidden by the edge of the hoodie's fabric, and he looked at the eyes beneath it, and he was 27 years old again, and the world was on fire, and somehow they had both gotten out. Captain Paul Merritt drew himself upright. His heels came together. The sound was clean military arriving in the cabin, with the sharp authority of something that means exactly what it sounds like. He raised his right hand. It was not theatrical. It was not performed. It arrived from somewhere below deliberation, from the 30 years of discipline that live in the body alongside the bone and do not request permission before they act. The salute was perfect elbow-wrist hand, the precise geometry of a gesture that carries the weight of everything it stands for. "Colonel Holloway," he said. His voice did not crack on the title, but it arrived with the specific gravity of a man who had been carrying the weight of an unpaid debt for 12 years and was only now finding the place to set it down. The cabin stopped breathing. Every phone that had been partially raised went still. Rosa Delgado held the frame without moving a muscle. Her live count was at 31,000, and the comments had gone from noise to silence in real time, people mid-sentence stopping watching. Brad Kellner set down his water glass. Diana Voss stood in the aisle with her tablet at her side and her smile completely and irretrievably gone, replaced by something for which she had no practiced expression, something that was making contact with a reality she had not prepared for. Marcus Holloway looked at Paul Merritt. Something moved across his face. Not surprise exactly. Closer to the particular emotion of a man who has spent a long time not expecting to be seen and finds it briefly arresting. He blinked once. He removed his baseball cap. The scar above his left eyebrow caught the cabin light. He nodded. One small, precise movement, the language of men who have communicated in conditions where words were expensive and precision was survival. "At ease, Captain," he said. Merritt lowered his hand. The smile that arrived on his face was the real version, not the professional warmth he used for boarding announcements, but the one that belongs to a feeling too large for the muscles managing it. The smile that looks slightly uncontrolled because it is. "I saw your name on the manifest," Merritt said. His voice was quiet now, meant for Marcus, though the cabin heard every word. "I had to come and make sure I was reading it correctly." He paused. "I thought there's no way he'd be on a commercial flight." "My usual aircraft is grounded," Marcus said. "Maintenance issue in Cincinnati. I needed to be in Atlanta by 3. Merritt made a sound that was equal parts laughter and exhaled relief. "Of course." He shook his head slightly. "Of course you did." For a moment, neither man spoke. The cabin around them had become very small and very far away. Then Merritt turned. The turn was slow. He turned from Marcus the way you turn from something that has required your full attention and now must give way to something that requires a different kind. He looked at Diana Voss. Diana Voss, in 11 years of flying, had faced things in first-class cabins that she was proud of navigating. She had not faced anything like the look on Paul Merritt's face as he turned from Marcus Holloway to her. It was not rage. Rage would have been easier to manage, easier to document, easier to build a response to. What she saw on Paul Merritt's face was something more difficult than rage. It was clarity. The complete, unstoppable clarity of a man who has seen a thing fully and cannot pretend he has not. "Ms. Voss," he said. Just her name. The way radio confirmations sound, flat, professional, carrying information with no additional decoration. Diana's mouth opened. No sound arrived. "This man," Merritt said, and each word was placed with the precision of a man who has decided that what he is saying is the most important thing he will say today. "This man heard my emergency channel when no one else did. He diverted from his mission. He landed on a road that was not a runway. He reached my cockpit before the fuel caught." He looked at her steadily. "He said, 'I've got you. Stay with me.'" That was what he said. The cabin made no sound. "And you spent the last 25 minutes," Merritt continued, "attempting to remove him from a seat he paid for because he was not wearing what you expected someone in that seat to wear." Diana's lips moved. "I was following." "You were following an assumption," Merritt said. the word assumption arrived precisely not as an insult as an accurate diagnosis. Every step you took today, the manifest conflict that did not exist. The Level 1 declaration for a man sitting calmly in his seat, the escalation to security, the escort request, every step was built on that assumption. You looked at him and decided before you checked anything. He glanced at Officer Howell. Howell gave one small nod, the confirmation of a man who had been saying the same thing in softer language for half an hour. Rosa's count was at 44,000. She had not said a word for 8 minutes. The comments were moving too fast to read. The clip of the salute was already being reposted across 7 platforms. It would have 2 million views before the plane landed. Finn Gallagher had typed one message to the Tribune journalist. "It's happened. Watch the 2C feed." He sent it and put his phone down and watched. Brad Kellner was looking at his hands with the expression of a man who has recently become very familiar with what his hands have been doing. Merritt looked back at Marcus. "I'm sorry," he said with the simplicity of a man who means every syllable of a short sentence, "that you had to sit through this." Marcus considered him for a moment. "Paul," he said, "you walked out of a cockpit mid-boarding." He paused. "That's not nothing." Merritt shook his head. "It's not enough, but it's what I have right now." Marcus nodded. "It's enough," he said. And Merritt turned back toward the cabin, toward Diana, toward Brad, toward every passenger who had made a decision in the last 25 minutes, some of which they were proud of, and some of which they would be thinking about for considerably longer than this flight. "There are going to be some changes," he said, "to how the rest of this flight operates. What followed did not arrive slowly or with negotiation." Paul Merritt had spent 30 years making decisions in conditions where the gap between deciding and acting was measured in fractions of seconds. The decisions he made in the next 10 minutes on the tarmac at O'Hare were not complicated. They were the application of truth to a situation that had been running on something other than truth for 25 minutes, and the correction was proportionate to the gap. He pulled his crew phone from his pocket and made 2 calls. The first was to the Crestline Air Duty Operations Director. "His name is Marcus Holloway," Merritt said. "His booking is valid, his seat is his, and his identity is not in question. This incident will be formally documented beginning the moment this call ends, and I am personally placing my name in the incident record as a witness to what occurred on this aircraft today." The duty director's voice came back careful and processing. "Understood, Captain. We'll initiate a formal incident review." The second call went to the Crestline Ground Operations Manager. Merritt asked for 2 things. He asked for the incident to be elevated immediately to the Corporate Compliance Office, and he asked in clear and direct language whether the company wanted the next step handled by the crew or whether they preferred to manage it from the ground. The answer came back in under a minute. "Your discretion, Captain." Merritt put the phone away. He walked back to the forward galley where Diana Voss was standing with her tablet and her composure, and the particular expression of someone who has been in a position of authority for long enough that consequence has become theoretical. He stood across from her with the deliberateness of someone who has made a decision and is now carrying it to completion. "Ms. Voss," he said, "I want to ask you one question before I make a formal recommendation to the compliance office." He paused. "When you saw Marcus Holloway's boarding pass at the gate, did you believe there was a genuine system error, or did you look at the man holding the pass and decide there should be one?" Diana's jaw held. "I was acting on standard crew." "Answer the question," Merritt said. "Not the procedure language, the actual question." A silence. 4 seconds. 5. "I looked at him," Diana said finally, "and I thought he didn't fit." She stopped. She looked at the galley wall. She looked at nothing. "I thought he didn't fit what first class looks like," she said. The words arrived in the galley and stayed there. Merritt nodded once, with the particular quality of nodding when you receive information you already knew but needed confirmed out loud. "Thank you for that," he said. He did not say it gently. He said it the way you say things that matter, without decoration. Then he turned to Camila Reyes, who was standing at the edge of the galley curtain. "You told her the booking was valid from the first check." Camila's voice was steady. "Yes, Captain, and she directed you to stand down." "Yes." Merritt reached into his shirt pocket and removed his crew authorization card, the physical laminated card that carries operational authority on the ground and in the air. He set it on the galley counter. "Ms. Voss," he said, "I am relieving you of your duties on this flight effective now. Camila Reyes will assume lead crew responsibility for Flight 304. You will disembark, surrender your crew credentials to ground operations, and report to the corporate HR office at O'Hare within the hour. What happens after that is not my decision to make. What happens right now is..." Diana stared at the card on the counter. She had known it was coming the way you know something is coming, when you have been moving steadily toward it for a long time and the distance has finally closed. But knowing doesn't soften what arrives when it arrives. She looked at Merritt. 11 years, she said. Her voice was flat, not performing anything, just stating a fact. "I know," he said. "I have never been removed from a flight." "I know that too," he said. And he paused. That's part of how mornings like this one become possible. When there are no consequences for a long time, people stop seeing what the cost is for the people on the other side of the assumption. Diana's composure had been holding for 25 minutes under pressure that would have broken a different kind of person faster. It held for 3 more seconds. Then it gave way, not dramatically, not with tears or raised voices, but with a small, complete collapse of the performance. Her shoulders dropped a fraction of an inch. Her chin tilted slightly down, and her eyes, which had been certain and calibrated since the moment Marcus had stepped onto the jet bridge, became briefly entirely human. "I didn't know who he was," she said. Marcus's voice came from seat 1A. He had been sitting through all of it with the stillness of a man who has decided to let events complete themselves. That he said is exactly the problem. The same words, the same weight they carried every time they were true, which was every time someone said, "I didn't know who he was," as though who he was should have been the variable, as though his dignity should have been proportional to the credentials he could produce. That is exactly the problem. Not that she had known and acted anyway, that she had not known, that she had not asked, that the absence of a suit and a briefcase and a visible marker of status had been enough to make her certain. Diana walked down the aisle. She did not look at Marcus. She did not look at Brad. She looked at the floor ahead of her. The narrow path between the seats, the path she had walked 1,000 times in the direction of service, now walked in the direction of departure. At the door, she paused. She turned back just slightly, the half-turn of someone considering whether to say something and deciding against it. Then she kept walking. The jet bridge received her. The sound of her heels on the ramp faded. Merritt walked back to the front of the cabin and turned his attention to Brad Kellner. Brad was already looking at him. He had the expression of a man who has measured the room and found the measurement unfavorable. He did not wait for Merritt to speak. "Sir," he said. His voice was quieter than it had been at any point in the last 25 minutes. "I want to apologize for what I said." He looked at his hands for a moment. "It was wrong. I said it without thinking, which I understand is not an excuse. It's just true." Merritt looked at him steadily. Then he looked at Marcus. Marcus looked at Brad with the calm of someone who has decided how much of his attention this moment deserves and is giving exactly that amount. "Remember why you're saying that," Marcus said. "Not because of what you found out about me. Because of who you want to be." Brad held that. He nodded once with the earnestness of someone who has not nodded sincerely at something in a long time. From the galley curtain, Camilla Reyes stepped into the aisle. She was holding the manifest tablet. Her back was straight. Her eyes were clear. She looked like someone who had been given a responsibility they were afraid of and had decided to be equal to it. She looked at Marcus. "Thank you," he said, "for what you did." She shook her head. "I should have done more. I said it once and stepped back." "What you did mattered," Marcus said. "Don't minimize it." She looked at him for a moment. Then she looked at the rest of first class, the passengers who had been witnesses to all of it, who had made their individual decisions in real time, some of which they were proud of, and some of which they were going to think about differently from this day forward. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said. Her voice carried with the particular confidence of someone who has found in the last 10 minutes the professional version of themselves they had always suspected was in there. "Thank you for your patience. On behalf of the crew, I'd like to apologize for what you witnessed this morning. We will get you to Atlanta safely and on time." The woman in 2A began to clap, slowly, deliberately, not with the energy of performance, but with the weight of something that deserved to be acknowledged. The sound moved forward from the back rows like a wave that builds without drama and arrives with complete conviction. And then it stopped and the cabin was quiet, and outside the windows the tarmac stretched in both directions under a pale Chicago sky, and the engines, patient and unremarkable, were preparing to begin. Rosa lowered her phone. She exhaled. Finn Gallagher typed his final message to the Tribune journalist. "He's in the seat. Plane's going to Atlanta. You'll have everything you need when I land." He closed his laptop. Marcus Holloway sat in seat 1A, buckled his duffel in the overhead bin, his hands resting on his thighs. He looked out the window at the runway extending ahead, long open, the kind of straight line that asks no questions and carries you forward regardless of what happened at the gate. He thought about a dirt road outside a village. He thought about a cafeteria in San Antonio with good light. He thought about all the rooms he had entered wearing the wrong thing for someone else's expectations and exited from wearing the same thing having changed nothing about himself because nothing about himself needed changing. He thought about the man who had saluted him. He thought about the woman who was walking through the terminal right now learning something she had not chosen to learn. The engines began to spool. The sound rose through the floor into the seat back into his spine. The aircraft began to move, and Marcus Holloway, who had been told that his seat was not for him and had sat down in it anyway, watched the terminal fall behind him and breathed the breath of someone who was exactly where they were supposed to be. 6 weeks after Flight 304 landed in Atlanta, Crestline Air released a public statement. It confirmed the termination of the lead flight attendant assigned to that flight, citing conduct that violated the airline's service standards and its commitment to non-discriminatory treatment of all passengers. It announced a mandatory conduct review for all cabin and ground personnel across every domestic route. And it announced the creation of a new internal passenger advocacy position, a dedicated role with the authority to receive and escalate conduct complaints directly, without filtering through any supervisory layer that might have reason to slow that process. The person hired for that role was Camilla Reyes. She had applied 3 days after landing. Brad Kellner's name appeared in none of the public reporting. He was not a public figure in this story, but something had been deposited in him that morning at Gate C-22, something that didn't leave when the plane landed, something that sat in his chest at subsequent departures and arrivals, and made him quieter in rooms where he had previously been loud. He was not transformed. Transformation is a long process, and it rarely announces itself. But he was different in the specific way that people are different when a mirror has been held up at an angle they couldn't avoid. He made different choices, small ones mostly. The kind that don't make the news but accumulate over time into something that matters. As for Marcus Holloway, he landed in Atlanta at 3:17 in the afternoon, 22 minutes behind schedule. He was met by no cameras, no reporters, no delegation of any kind. He walked off the jet bridge with his duffel on his shoulder, took an elevator to the ground floor, and got into a car that had been waiting. He had a meeting at 4. He was not late. Now I want to speak to you directly. Not as a narrator, not as a storyteller, as someone who thinks about why these stories matter and what we're supposed to do with them after the video ends. Marcus Holloway did not win because of who he turned out to be. He was right before Captain Merritt walked out of that cockpit. He was right the moment he stepped onto the jet bridge with a valid boarding pass and was told to step aside. The reveal did not create the justice, it revealed the cost of the injustice that was already happening. And that distinction matters more than anything else I could say about this story. Because here is what I need you to sit with. Diana Voss looked at a man and made a decision about him before she checked a single fact. She built an entire 25-minute case out of that one initial decision, adding procedure and protocol and escalation on top of assumption, the way you build a wall brick by brick out of material that was never solid to begin with. And she was not unusual. She was not a monster. She was a person who had been allowed to operate this way for 11 years without consequence in a structure that normalized what she was doing by never naming it. That is how these things persist, not through dramatic acts of obvious cruelty, but through the slow, unremarkable accumulation of choices that feel reasonable in the moment, because no one has ever said out loud that they are not. And here is what I want to ask you specifically, personally, before you close this tab or skip to the next video. Where is your Camila Reyes moment? Where is the moment you had the manifest in your hand, the evidence, the truth, the thing that made the situation clear, and you set it back down on the counter because speaking up felt too costly, because you were junior, because you were outnumbered, because you told yourself that someone else would handle it? I'm not asking that to shame you. I'm asking because I think most of us have had that moment more than once. And the distance between a Camila who steps back and a Camila who steps forward is not a matter of character. It's a matter of choice. One specific choice in one specific moment when something is still possible that will not be possible 30 seconds later. Choose forward. That is the whole lesson. It is not complicated and it is not easy, and it is available to every single person watching this regardless of what they're wearing or where they're sitting, or what their name means to anyone else in the room. Choose forward when you have something true in your hands. Because the world does not change all at once. It changes in the aisles, in the small moments when one person decides that the truth matters more than the discomfort of saying it out loud. Marcus Holloway sat in his seat. He held his ground. He did not raise his voice once. And 12 years before that flight on a burning road outside a village, he had done the same thing, gone back through the smoke for a stranger, because it was what needed to be done with no expectation of recognition, no plan for what the recognition would look like when it eventually arrived. Power doesn't always announce itself, he had once said. Sometimes it simply goes back for the person who needs it and waits for the record to speak. This is the record speaking. If this story stayed with you, if you felt something in that cabin that you recognize from your own life, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Drop your city in the comments and tell me, would you have spoken up? Would you have held the frame like Rosa? Would you have sent the message like Finn? Would you have stepped out from behind the curtain like Camila Subscribe if you haven't yet? There are more stories like this one. And until the next one, hold the line with grace, because the person in the wrong seat is always exactly where they belong.